To everybody who's joined, welcome and thank you so much for joining us today for DCAO's second in the series of uh, learning what it is to be a divorce coach and all the great things that go along with that. So I am Heather Tannenbaum. I am a certified divorce coach and I am a member of DCAO as well. And I've been practicing for about 7 years, and I'm very excited to be here today to talk about our topic, understanding the role of a divorce coach, with my co-host, of course, Leanne Townsend.
Good morning, everybody. Just by way of background, I am a senior divorce lawyer at Benmore Family Law Group, and I am also an accredited divorce coach. I've been practicing law since 1995, so over 30 years. And the first part of my career, I was an assistant Crown attorney and a domestic violence co-lead in the Toronto West Crown's office. So I have extensive experience in abusive relationships and family violence, and I brought that into my family law practice. And I've been practicing family law for about 10 years now. And I am also a board member with the DCAO, and I'm happy to be here today.
Thank you. So we have some questions set up that we feel will kind of cover this topic. But of course, if anybody has any questions, you're welcome to put them in the chat. And Taya, who is monitoring the chat, will ensure that your question gets to us. So the first question that we have, so we're going to be talking on defining the rules clearly. So as a lawyer, Leanne, I will be asking you the questions for the lawyer, and you can certainly ask me the questions for the coach. So, how do you explain your role to clients, and where do you see the boundaries of legal support ending?
I think that's a great question. A lot of clients, when they come to me, they understand what a lawyer is, but sometimes they maybe have assumptions about things that are beyond the role technically of a lawyer or beyond what a lawyer might be trained in. And so, as a lawyer, my role is to give legal advice to clients in the area of family law. And that's my, most lawyers' principal expertise. That's my expertise, and that's the role that I should be playing when a client comes to me with a family law matter. I don't have training in, I took some psychology courses, but I'm not a psychologist. I'm not a therapist. I'm not an accountant. I'm not an expert in taxes. I know how to complete a financial statement, and I have some general knowledge of taxes and things like that. And I have some general knowledge of, things to do that a therapist might do, but I'm not a qualified therapist. I am trauma informed. I have done training in that, and so I do bring that to my practice, but that's not necessarily the case for all family law lawyers. And so that's important that clients understand that. And so where I see legal support ending is to do with these sorts of things that are outside my training. I'm not going to give a client tax advice. I'm going to send them to an accountant for that. I'm not a therapist. So if a client needs the support of a therapist, I'm going to refer them to a therapist. And there's a lot of emotional, you know, just emotional issues and lots of feelings and things that come up, obviously, when people are going through a divorce. And as a lawyer, it's not really in my legal lane to be helping clients with managing those sorts of things. I mean, again, I'm trauma informed and I am a divorce coach as well. So I do have some experience and background in being able to assist clients with those things. But if they've hired me as a lawyer, I would be expensive to use in those roles and as a therapist. And so it's better for somebody to use a divorce coach to help with those things. And certainly a lot of lawyers want to just, strictly stay in that legal lane. That's what we've been retained for. And that's where a divorce coach can be of tremendous assistance to a client on a file. So, Heather, on this same topic, how
Yeah.
do you define your role in a way that complements rather than overlaps with legal advice?
So to jump onto what you were saying, learning to stay in your lane is really important, and where your lane ends maybe that's where mine starts, or maybe mine ends where yours starts. But I really focus as a coach on the human side of divorce as opposed to the legal side. So I help my clients obviously, stay clear or get clear on their priorities, manage their emotions, and make thoughtful decisions that they can use within their legal process, making them a much more efficient and effective client. I help my clients prepare for those conversations to stay organized and move through the process with confidence and less overwhelm. A big part of my role also is helping my clients understand the options available to them within the ADR process or even with their legal meetings. So I help them prepare for mediation, court appearances, collaborative law process, and help them figure out the strategies that they then take to someone like you to figure out how to incorporate that into their particular set of circumstances. So their second slide, does that answer the questions? Tay, is there anything that we need to kind of jump in on? Okay. So at what point, Leanne, in a client's case, do you typically see the greatest benefit from involving a divorce coach?
I mean, I would say that a divorce coach is beneficial to a client at any stage in the process. Certainly early on, there's benefit. Some clients contact a divorce coach before even contacting a lawyer, and that can be actually a very smart move because the coach can help them find a lawyer who is going to be the best fit for their specific situation. Often, when people decide that they're separating or divorcing or they get served with court papers, they get into a panic about finding a lawyer and they ask their friends and family and they reach out and retain the first person that their friend or family member suggested to them. And that lawyer might not be the right fit for them personally and for their case. And so that's where there's a benefit to speaking to a divorce coach first and having them help a client find the lawyer who's going to be the right fit. And then throughout the case, there's enormous benefit to having a divorce coach involved because divorce is a very emotional process. And there are a lot of things, not just to do with emotions, but even some of the things Heather touched upon about preparing for a mediation or preparing for a court appearance. A lawyer is still going to want to do those things with a client as well, but there's a benefit to having a divorce coach do initial prep with the client, touching upon various aspects so that the lawyer can focus more on legal strategy and prepping the client with respect to the legal issues and how the lawyer wants to manage the client's expectations in the process and things like that. And so throughout, there's tremendous benefit. I find when there's a coach involved, when we get an email from opposing counsel that, is super aggressive or stating things that the client knows are just factually incorrect and it stirs up a lot of emotions and can be triggering, it's extremely beneficial to have a divorce coach involved who can help the client process that email and take that call rather than the client processing it with me at my lawyer's rate and really having more of a venting session than a legal session. And then even towards the end, I think there's benefit to a divorce coach then. Clients are sometimes satisfied with the results, and sometimes, unfortunately, in a court outcome, they might not be satisfied, and having a divorce coach to help them process that can be very beneficial. There's divorce coaches who focus on divorce recovery, and so that can obviously be a whole form of coaching following divorce that can be beneficial. So I think divorce coaches are fantastic to have on board at any point in the process. So over to you, Heather. What signs do you look for that indicate that a client would benefit from coaching alongside legal representation?
So I look for signs that a client is feeling overwhelmed, stuck, or just emotionally flooded to the point that it makes it difficult or challenging for them to engage in this process on their own. For example, if they're struggling to make decisions, if they're acting impulsively, if they're not able to actually comprehend or take in what their lawyer is saying, then that's a good time to bring in a divorce coach who can help to kind of regulate their emotion get them focused, and actually help them focus on resolution as opposed to the emotion. And so, whether that's in the legal meeting, whether that's in a mediation process or negotiations or any forum with which they would have to show up as their best self, that's when you bring in a coach who can help. So, oftentimes, I attend lawyer meetings with my clients because they're not in a state that they're able to actually retain what their lawyer is saying or understand it. So I take the notes. I can speak to the lawyer in a language that the lawyers can quickly determine what it is that the client is asking. Instead of going the roundabout way from A to Z, they can take a direct route. And we get the conversation going in a way that even if the client isn't absorbing it all at the time, they can kind of unpack that with me at a later time and we can go through it then. And that also puts them in a better state of mind to be able to strategize, set their goals, and figure out what it is they need to get to their next steps.
And I should add on this point that I've had experience working with a client who retained a divorce coach before me. And so the coach was already on board when the client started working
Mhm.
with me. And I've been able to work effectively with coaches in that circumstance. And then I also have situations where the client came to me first, and I could tell that they could benefit from using a divorce coach. And at that point, I will refer them to, I will raise the concept of the many benefits of having a divorce coach and refer them to a divorce coach once we've already started the process. And when, clients who I can see particularly struggling with anxiety, and decision making and those sorts of things, those are clients where, very quickly I can tell that they could benefit enormously from having a divorce coach. So I'll make the referral.
Yeah, it becomes paralyzing for them. And another advantage that having a divorce coach on board can do is it allows them to have the tools, helps them to get organized. I help a lot of my clients organize all their information and prepare in an intentional way for these meetings so that they can use their legal support in an effective way to make those decisions that they need to make.
We have a couple of questions actually. Are
Okay,
you available for that? Okay.
sure.
So from Anamika, I'm sorry if I've mispronounced that. She asks, or they ask, Canadian family mediation training, can that be helpful in becoming a good divorce coach?
I would say yes. In fact, I think there are a number of divorce coaches who actually are also qualified mediators or accredited mediators, and I think I think there's a lot of benefit to the training. It touches upon obviously family law, touches upon domestic violence or family violence and screening for that. And I think any of us, anyone who's playing a role in the divorce system, it's important that we have training in family violence because it is prevalent, and people who are survivors of family violence need to be handled in a very careful way to ensure that we are helping to support them properly. So I think that there is enormous benefit to having that training and being a coach. Heather, what are your thoughts?
I totally agree with you. I think the more training that a coach can have, they just bring more information to that coaching process. So, for example, when I'm coaching my clients in their mediation preparation, which I'm also certified to do, it helps that I've been to mediation processes before. It helps that I've had some training in that. So I know exactly how to prepare them better. So there's fewer surprises on the day of. The better prepared they can be, the better it's going to show up for them in that actual process. And we can never discount the importance of all the options that there are with ADR, right? Because our clients are going to engage in these, whether it's just negotiation, whether it's even simple negotiation with a co-parent. Okay, they're strategies that we help them to hone in on those skills so they're able to take that away with them.
Another similar question. Having an extensive experience in family law as a cross-border lawyer, how can this course be beneficial?
I think again, going back to what Heather was just saying, that the more training in this area, the better. So there certainly are client situations that are involving cross-border issues. So having experience with that is going to be helpful. You always, of course, unless you're a lawyer, you want to be careful about the line between giving legal advice and legal information. And so, a divorce coach shouldn't be giving legal advice on cross-border issues. But if there's legal information, it's only helpful to have that knowledge to be able to impart upon a client who's in that situation.
It's also beneficial because unlike a lawyer, the advantage that a coach has is that we are not bound by certain jurisdictional laws or anything like that because we don't focus on the law. So we can certainly help. Our strategies are universal. The coaching that we do is worldwide, it's global. So there's no borders in terms of that. So it also helps in that regard as well.
And one more question from Steve Benmore. He says, I had a client call yesterday where he says that the parties and kids are still living together in the home and everyone is miserable and the wife is demanding that he move out or else. How would you coach him?
So I have that a lot actually in my practice. It depends. If they're hell bent on not leaving the matrimonial home, then the best that we can do is provide them with strategies on how to minimize conflict within the family, whether that's setting up an interim parenting plan and figuring out the logistics within the house. Mom's going to have dinner with the kids on this day, dad's going to have on this day. As a coach, I really listen to what the particular family dynamics and needs are, and we come up with a plan accordingly. It's a stopgap measure. It's not a perfect solution, but it's not a perfect situation. So, as a coach, part of what we do is we work within the parameters of our client's comfort level. And we have to come up with strategies or have our clients come up with strategies along with our support that work for them and their family.
And I would echo Heather's comments on that. And wearing a coach hat and not a lawyer hat, I would want to, map out for them the benefits, not from necessarily a legal perspective, but from other perspectives of moving out or staying in the home, and so that they could make a decision that might be most appropriate. As a lawyer, you often advise people not to move out because there can be legal consequences, but staying in a miserable, toxic environment and seeing how children are suffering in that environment, sometimes it may not be the best legal decision to move out, but there are other more important reasons to do something, and you could, help a client if they're really in that toxic situation and they need to look at plans in terms of moving out. As a coach, you could help them map that out.
Leanne, you brought up a very important word that distinguishes coach from lawyer. You brought up the word advise. So, as a lawyer, it is your role, going back to the role, your role is to advise. As a coach, my role is not to advise. My role is to help my client come up with strategies that work for them and create an environment for them that's conducive to them coming up with problem solving of their own. So
Yeah,
we empower the
absolutely.
client in that regard as opposed to advise. So that's a big distinction between coach and lawyer. So,
That's all the
Tara, are
questions.
there any other questions?
That's it for now.
Okay, so now we can go on to the slide that I've got on the screen, emotional versus legal decision making. So, Leanne, how do emotional dynamics impact your client's ability to make sound legal decisions?
This is a big challenge for family law clients because there are so many emotions and emotional dynamics that they are experiencing through the separation process, and it can impact, different people are impacted differently. Some people, block that kind of stuff out and they just want to hunker down and they want to just go, 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 go. And some people get overwhelmed by the emotional dynamics and they become frozen and they can't make decisions. I've worked with clients who were survivors of family violence. And I find that sometimes those in that situation, because of the trauma that they've experienced, they can have a really hard time at making decisions. And I find that unless they are supported properly and have a coach or a therapist or both, we can often find that they spin in the decisions. I'll have a meeting with them and we'll be talking and talking, and they can't make a decision and they can't make a decision. And by the end of the meeting, they've made a decision. And then the next day, they're already questioning the decision and want to have the same conversation over and over multiple times. And that can be very expensive for them, obviously, because they're paying a lawyer for their time. And so having the same conversation over and over about a decision, it's not productive and it's expensive. And so those are examples of situations where I think divorce coaches can be tremendously beneficial for a client to help them think about all of the factors that they need to think about in order to come to that legal decision.
Yeah, so I phrase that to my clients as I'm going to help them jump off that merry-go-round, right?
Yeah, it's very important. And a lot of people, when they're going through this process, they are dysregulated. I say that I spend a lot of my time day to day dealing with people who are emotionally dysregulated, and that impacts their ability to make decisions. They can be reactive. They can, again, be not dealing with it because they're just stuffing it down, and they don't want to deal with it. They're stuck. And so those are all situations where a coach is better suited to help the client with those. And sometimes when an email comes in from an opposing counsel or an opposing party, if they're self-represented, it can be very triggering or upsetting to a client, and they need to vent. They don't need to have a legal conversation necessarily. They need to vent. And again, the divorce coach is better suited to deal with that. And that kind of ties in, I think, with the next question that I was going to put to you, Heather, is how do you help clients regulate their emotions so that they can engage more effectively in the legal process?
So it's a great question, but I want to just add on to the last thing you said. And as a coach, part of my job is, and my obligation actually, at the beginning of every session, I I sit down with my client and I say, so what is it that you would like to focus on for today? Because I think that that really is a very effective coaching tool to get them to figure out, okay, what are my most important things? What do I want to vent today? Maybe I do. Maybe I need to talk about this. Maybe I have court materials that are due, but I want to vent. And so that type of question, what is it that you want to focus on today? How can I help you in our session? Is a really good way to get them focused on what they need to focus on. So now that I haven't been focused, I'm going to go back to your question. And I really find that a divorce coach supports the emotional regulation specifically to help clients engage more effectively in the ADR processes like negotiation, mediation, or collaborative divorce. We work on helping clients stay grounded. We help them manage triggers and communicate with intention, especially in high conflict moments. I use tools to help my clients and encourage them to pause, listen actively, and respond rather than react, which is critical, which is critical to reaching a workable agreement and resolution. We really focus, and as a coach, it is my job to ensure or help my clients to come to the table with a good intention to communicate, problem solve, and move towards resolution instead of escalation. Okay, so I think we can move on to the fourth point, which is preparing clients for mediation in court, which is unfortunately a huge, huge part of the divorce process. And oftentimes people I find are preparing for court, but with good ADR, it doesn't often have to go to court. Sometimes it does, but not always. So in this type of situation, Leanne, what challenges do you commonly see when clients come unprepared for mediation or a legal meeting?
Well, certainly when they come unprepared, there can be a lot of time wasted, which again because for a lawyer, time is money, and there's a cost to our time. Wasting time is, it's expensive for the client. You want to make sure that as a client, you want to make sure you're getting the most value for your dollar. And I want that too as their lawyer. I don't want to see them wasting money on my time, coming unprepared. So it's important that clients are prepared when they come in, that they have their documents organized if we need to be looking at documents, and that they're in a place to make decisions and that they can focus on what we need to cover in the meeting. If they have, all kinds of things weighing on them and they're distracted, they're not going to focus. And if we are going to a mediation or we're having a legal meeting to prepare for court, I want them to be able to focus. I want them to hear what I'm saying. I want them to be able to take it in, because part of that meeting, from my perspective, is preparing them for that next step. And so it's really important that they're coming to it in a place to listen and be focused, and that they're prepared. And I'm curious, Heather, in your role as a coach, how do you prepare clients differently so that they can show up to these meetings with their lawyer more focused, organized, and outcome oriented?
This is the name of the game, right? And helping them minimize their legal costs is a big part of this. And if I'm doing my job properly, everything that you've said you want your client to show up as, that is how they're showing up. So I work to prepare my clients by helping them get really, really clear on their goals, their priorities, and very important, their non-negotiables before any ADR session or legal meeting. We organize their thoughts, questions, and key information in advance so they're not trying to figure things out as they go or in that crucial moment that should be focused on resolution. I walk them through what to expect, how to help them plan, what they want to communicate, especially around sensitive topics. That preparation keeps them focused on outcomes rather than getting pulled into the emotional reactions so that they can use their time in the process much more effectively. And hopefully, each mediation session or court appearance, they work steps towards resolution as opposed to escalating the conflict.
And I think it's really important that the lawyer and the coach have a good working relationship. Like, I've seen situations where someone's working with a divorce coach and the coach and the lawyer have nothing to do with each other.
Yeah.
They are completely in separate, lanes. And personally, I don't like that type of situation. I think that it's important that they're working together and to ensure that they're both aligned, because you don't want to have a situation where a client is getting different information from a divorce coach than from their lawyer, because that's going to create obviously, an internal conflict within the client of who am I supposed to listen to here? And as a lawyer, when I'm recommending a course of action to a client, I want the support of the divorce coach, because part of being a lawyer, unfortunately, is often telling clients things that they don't want to hear. I feel like I have to be the
Yeah.
cold water sometimes that's pouring on them, and it's not my job just to be a yes person or a barking dog and go do whatever it is they want me to do. I
Yeah.
have to tell them why that, maybe isn't the best course of action, or the
Right.
cons of it. And so if the client's working with a divorce coach who is having a different opinion on things or giving them different information, it can be very hard. But it helps me when I'm giving them that bad news, that what their proposal, for example, for an offer to settle, how they would like to approach it is just way out. It's not appropriate. I'm not going to spend my time and their money drafting something. I want to know that the divorce coach is going to be on board with that, because they can help me manage the client's expectations
Yeah.
with that.
Well, I always say as a coach, as coaches, we are strategic partners with our clients, but I'm also a strategic partner with their lawyer working towards the client's best interest. So there are times, and obviously with my client's permission and their knowledge, I will meet with their lawyer without the client there and say, okay, here's the situation. How can we best help the client? What is it that you need from me in this process? And I'll tell the lawyer what I need from them. So it works in the client's best interest, which is really the name of the game.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We have a couple things in the comments. From Catherine, she says, hello, I'm an accountant. I've collaborated with a divorce coach for several of my divorce clients. The divorce coach was extremely helpful in managing the client's emotional and financial stress. Using a divorce coach also saved them a tremendous amount of money at a time when funds were often crippled by the other spouse. I highly recommend using a divorce coach to all my divorce clients. So thank you for that, Catherine. And we have a question from Dory. Can you speak a little more about how you prep a client to succeed in ADR proposal development, such as their BATNA and WATNA?
Sure. So, best outcomes and worst outcomes, it's the BATNA and the WATNA. So, when I'm working with a client on preparing for mediation with their mediation prep, I will say, okay, we make two lists. What are your wants? What are your needs? And then we really look at, okay, is this really a need or is it a want? And can you kind of flip that for something else? I really try to make it seem like it's kind of like a deck of cards. And if we trade in this for that, but it's for me as a coach, getting the client to actually take a step back and see what are the really, really important issues here. Their best outcome is not likely going to be the outcome they get on every point. So accepting that and figuring out what their best alternative would be.
I think that
Also,
that's, oh, sorry, I didn't mean to interject. You finish.
no, you did. And I had a thought after. Also accepting like what is the worst case scenario and is it that bad? Because in the moment, it may seem catastrophic that I don't get to take my kids trick or treating every Halloween, right? That's catastrophic in the moment. But when we take a step back and I help my client find perspective, maybe every other year's not so bad.
And I think this is a really important example of where working with a divorce coach will save a client money because if a client has done this work with a coach, then they can come to the lawyer meeting and they already know what their wants are, and what their needs are. They don't have to go through that sort of process with the lawyer because that is something as a lawyer that I have done in my role as a lawyer. I've done that with clients as well. But if the client has already done it with a divorce coach beforehand, they don't need to pay me to do that. They've already got that clearly set out. And so it's a great way for a client to save money and use the time with the lawyer more effectively.
Well, and like I had this week, there was a couple and they were spending so much time and energy fighting about the kids' snow pants. For the money you're spending on lawyers' letters going back and forth about the snow pants, you could have bought your kid snow pants to last until they're 20, like every size and every
Exactly.
color. Like really?
And that
So,
happens more than it should, those types of
yeah.
arguments. And so again, that's where if somebody we could work with a divorce coach, they're not going to be, paying their lawyer $600 an hour or, or something similar to go and argue about snow pants.
Yeah, my job as a coach is to help my client find perspective, and your job as the lawyer is to advise them once they have.
Exactly.
In a perfect world.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay, so
and we have another question actually on this
sure,
topic from
sure.
Andrea. She says, do you provide your clients examples of wants versus needs and how to determine a want versus a need?
Great question. Short answer is yes, I do. But instead of giving them the answer, I'll come up with different scenarios and say, so like, is this important to you? Or is that more important to you? Or I had a situation um, where the parenting time was much more important to my client than the child support amount, for example. And so I said, okay, so if you're focusing on that, what can you give up in the child support in order to get what you want for the parenting time? And how do we work in those parameters? And what are some things that are important to you? And so by asking, thought-provoking questions to your client, and framing them in ways that they hadn't thought of before and that really forced them to kind of go deep. That's the true art of a good coach. And by doing that, I don't actually have to come up with examples for them because if I do my job right, they're coming up with the examples for themselves. And my job then becomes, you know what? That's a great idea. Let's work with that. So I don't have to give them the answer if I'm formulating the questions in the right way. And that's
Going back to this, the snow pants issue, Steve's made a great comment in the chat that it's never about the snow pants, and that's why we need coaches. And that's exactly it. The snow pants aren't the issue in that situation. It's a power dynamic quite often that has gone on between the parties where one party wants to control and the other party maybe feels that they've spent a whole marriage being controlled and they're not going to be controlled, and or they feel that they've been wronged, or it's all emotions underlying it, and that is time that somebody should is better spent using a coach to sort out and deal with and manage and process than a lawyer.
I think we should have t-shirts made. It's never about the snow pants.
It's not a bit this way. We have another great comment here from Samantha. She says, "Hi all, thank you for doing what you all do. I too have aligned with coaches on many files while selling the matrimonial home, and the benefits are great. One, conflict is minimized between choices regarding getting the home prepared for market. Two, cost is reduced for the client as I do not have to reach out to their lawyers. Three, offer negotiations. Four, who is keeping wet in the home? Five, keeping the emotions at bay during all stages, pricing, listing, negotiating, and closing." Thanks
Yep.
for that, Samantha.
Check, 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 and check.
Check, check, check.
Exactly. And that just reminds me of, again, as a lawyer, like a lot of those types of things, it just shows how the process is so much more streamlined and effective when someone is working with a coach and all of these elements.
Yeah, absolutely. Any other questions, Taya?
Not
Okay,
right now.
so communication and conflict management. How does high conflict communication between parties affect the legal process and outcomes from a lawyer's perspective?
That's a great question. And high conflict communication is a problem. There's certain lawyers who tend to constantly approach things that way. And there's clients obviously as well who they're in a high conflict matter. They want to, sometimes clients want to approach it that way. And having high conflict communication definitely creates more conflict. It feeds upon the conflict, creates more legal costs, because the more conflict, the more, the more involved your lawyer is, the more things they have to do, the more court appearances probably. And so it becomes more and more expensive, and conflict just feeds upon conflict. Trying to calm the situation and reduce the conflict is beneficial to the client. And sometimes they don't realize that. They're caught up in the emotions. They want to see their lawyer, put that other side in their place. They want to see a performance of sorts by their lawyer. And but it's important for clients to understand, for example, letters. Lawyers send letters back and forth, and some have styles of communicating that are very high conflict and giving deadlines. You need to respond by 5 p.m. on April 15th, and it's like, or what? And clients, because they don't understand when lawyers are giving these deadlines, that court deadlines are, they have to be respected. But a lawyer deadline is an arbitrary date that a lawyer has put into a letter to elicit an emotional reaction from the other side, to make them feel pressured, to make them feel like, oh, like that lawyer said I have to respond by this date. What if I don't respond? I've got to do it. It's a tactic. And so clients, if they're working with a coach, they can be, and with a good lawyer should be explaining to a client that that is a tactic, and that they don't need to be responding by that deadline, and that this style of communication isn't helpful, and that we should be reducing the temperature in the room. And that's what a lawyer in that situation should be doing. Because, as they say, conflict does feed upon conflict, and it just raises emotions and results in, I think, bad decisions quite often. And so, Heather, if you're involved in a high conflict file, and I'm sure you've been involved in many, and I can think of some that I know because of referrals and things like that that you've been involved in. So, what tools or strategies do you teach clients to reduce conflict and communicate more effectively?
That's a big, big part of the job, and finding the right tools for the right client to help reduce conflict and keep communication productive is very important. So I'll introduce simple frameworks for structuring conversations, things like staying on one issue at a time and being very clear and concise. Practice how to respond to difficult triggering comments. So sometimes it's a matter of scripting things out. Sometimes it's a matter of coming up with some umbrella statements. Sometimes it's just reminding clients that in a mediation setting, for example, you can say, I need a 5 minute break. Now, you shouldn't probably be saying that every 5 minutes, but if you find, that you're being triggered and we identify things that the client can feel and things that come up for them that they need to say, you know what, I need a 5 minute break. And so being able to have that 5 minutes, whether it's to call your coach or just take some breaths or, get that perspective, take that break. Because if you're able to then go back in and show up as a better version of yourself and the version of yourself that you've worked hard with your coach on showing up as, that's going to definitely help you move towards resolution instead of getting stuck in the conflict.
And a really good way to approach high conflict communication is something called BIF. It's a technique that was developed by a guy by the name of Bill Eddy, who does a lot of work in this field. And what it stands for is brief, informative, friendly, and firm.
Yeah.
And so, as a lawyer, I always try to use that model in responding to high conflict communication. And it's a and I tell my clients in dealing with their ex-spouse that BIF is a really good way to manage those high conflict communications.
So in coaching, we spend a lot of time talking about BIF as well, because it's a universal, brilliant, simple strategy for communication with an ex, negotiation, life, like everything. It can be applied to everything. And in our coaching training as well, we really highlight the importance and benefits of BIF.
We have another question. This one it says, is it ever proper for the divorce coach to form and communicate to the client the observation that the client's lawyer is causing increased conflict, or should the coach lay low to maintain diplomacy?
Whew. Ooh, that's a good one.
That is a good question. How would
Um,
you approach it, Heather? Or have you been in that
sure,
situation?
throw it back at me. Um, Great question. Again, my role is not, I mean, I can certainly sometimes, with asking my client's permission to move forward with something uncomfortable, I can make an observation. Whether I would make an observation about how their lawyer is, I probably wouldn't, but what I would do is structure some thought-provoking questions aimed at helping my client find clarity on how to move forward with that lawyer in a more effective way, or they would come to the conclusion that perhaps that's not the right lawyer for them. But again, a lot of times when I see conflict between client and lawyer, it's a disconnect between the two. Maybe it's the fact that the lawyer isn't communicating in a way that the client needs to hear, and vice versa. And oftentimes, as a coach, I feel that my role is to be a bridge and to bridge that gap between client and lawyer with communication and things like that. And having a coach on the calls with your lawyer oftentimes alleviates some of that miscommunication. Now, if you've hired a lawyer that just isn't your job, like your jam, and you don't vibe, then maybe that's not the right lawyer for your file. It doesn't mean they're not a good lawyer. It just means, as Leanne said earlier, they're not a good fit lawyer. But a lot of times, a lot of the issues can be resolved through communication. I've been in many meetings where I felt like a mediator, and to be clear, I'm not trained as a mediator, but between lawyer and client to just hammer out what each one needs from the other one in terms of being able to work together towards the resolution for the client.
And this is why I think it's so important for the lawyer and the coach to have a good working relationship. And if you're the client and your lawyer doesn't want anything to do with your divorce coach, and I say this as a lawyer, I think you should really seriously look at why is your lawyer saying that? How is that beneficial to you if your lawyer doesn't want to work with a divorce coach? Because again, as a lawyer myself, I would say that it is, it's so, there's so many benefits to it for a client that a lawyer who isn't open to that, I have to wonder, what is the motivation behind that? And is it really in the client's best interest not to have that assistance? So ideally you want to have a coach and a lawyer who are working well together. And, if that's not happening and, they're at odds, or and if you're a client and you're uncomfortable communicating certain things to your lawyer, I think that's a problem too. I always say to clients that, like, you're the one in charge. Not the lawyer is not in charge. You are the client. You're the one paying the lawyer. You've hired them and retained them. You are in charge. And so a client should never feel intimidated or embarrassed or uncomfortable to be asking their lawyer certain questions or raising dissatisfaction with something and whatnot. And sometimes clients, unfortunately, do feel intimidated or they do feel uneasy speaking to their lawyer. And that to me is a bad dynamic between a lawyer and a client, because you need to be able to have effective communication. And so clients in that situation, certainly a divorce coach could be tremendously beneficial as the bridge. But ideally, everyone should be, communicating well with each other and all rowing in the
Yeah.
same direction.
Yeah. And the right coach will help empower the client to do exactly what you've just said and see the relationship from the dynamic you just described. Okay, time is of the essence. So, efficiency and cost savings. In your experience, how can coaching impact the efficiency or cost of a legal case?
I think, again, that's a great question. And I think that we've discussed a lot already today, the efficiencies that can happen from divorce, having a divorce coach involved, and the things that they can help clients with, and how that makes the process more efficient. And it does result in cost savings because they're not using their lawyer to do non-legal things. And, it's interesting. I find oftentimes when I start working with a client and I bring up the idea of bringing a coach on board because I think they could benefit from it. Sometimes the initial response I will get is, "Oh, like I can't afford that. Like I need all my money for my lawyer. I'm not going to be able to afford to have like another person involved and be paying them." But that's backward thinking, because the coach is actually going to save them money on the legal fees. And I tell that to the client in that situation, that no, 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 like the coach will help you save money on me so that you can use me for the legal issues, and deal with, the coach can help you with the other issues. And sometimes what I see happen, unfortunately, is a client comes in, starts working with a lawyer, and they are using their lawyer a lot for non-legal things like venting, processing emotions, talking about how angry they are and triggered they are by something that's going on. And they're paying these large legal bills because they're using their lawyer for all these other things as well. And then lo and behold, they run out of money. And they run out of money as the matter is going farther and farther along and getting closer and closer to a trial, which is probably when they will ultimately need a lawyer the most, at the trial stage. And now they've run out of money because they spent all their money earlier on using their lawyer for non-legal things, when if they'd had a coach on board or used a coach, they would have been able to strategically save their money and then use it when needed the most for legal advice.
Yeah, and I just saw a quote come across my desk yesterday from a lawyer for one of my clients about the quote for their upcoming trial, and it's astronomical. So if you can save money before you get to that, please do.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, how do you, Heather, help clients as a divorce coach to use legal time more strategically to avoid these unnecessary expenses?
Organize, organize, organize. Like organize your documents, understand what documents are relevant, what documents are not relevant, understand what information is relevant for your lawyer and what information is not relevant. And a good coach will help the client sift through all that stuff. I heard a quote the other day. It said, it was from a lawyer, and he said, documentation is self-defense. So it's important to look at it from that perspective. But a text message from 7 years ago saying that I don't love you anymore and I'm going to give you the house, that might not be necessary to send to your lawyer now, along with 100 other text messages from 7 years ago. So a good coach will help you focus. Because remember, Leanne, you're charging your clients to read all this stuff that they're sending you, as you should. So it's incumbent upon the client to be smart and strategic about what they send. Now, it's always better to send more than less and let the lawyer determine what is relevant and what isn't. But a lot of times, a lot of the stuff that comes across my computer screen doesn't need to necessarily go to the lawyer. And if it does need to go to the lawyer, it doesn't need to go at this stage.
Yeah, I think that's a perfect example of what I just experienced recently on a file. I had a client send me a bunch of text messages and videos that she thought really helped her case. And I had to spend time reading through them and then also watching these videos. And my clerk did as well. And when we both finished, we kind of said to each other, like, did you see anything in there that
Right.
helped? Because I actually thought the text messages were actually more helpful to the other side, who was accusing my client of being a gatekeeper
Right.
with respect to parenting time, and the texts were clearly showing that she was, but yet she saw these texts as some sort of smoking gun that was going to really help our case. And if she had vetted them with a divorce coach first, it probably never would have come to my desk to look at through her, and she wouldn't have had to waste the money with me reviewing it only to
Yeah.
see that it's really not helpful.
Exactly. Now, I apologize. I've kind of skipped along looking at time. So I've kind of skipped along to this question, advice for clients. So what do you wish clients understood about working with a coach? And I think you summed it up really nicely, but if you could, just package it up with a red bow here.
I think the most important thing clients need to understand or about working with a coach is that it is going to make their matter more efficient, and most importantly, it's going to save them money. It's not that I'm hiring another person, I've got another person I've got to pay. That person is going to help you reduce your legal fees. It's not costing you more money, and clients really need to understand that there's just so many benefits to having a divorce coach on their matter.
Yeah, agreed.
And what do you wish clients understood about the legal process and their lawyer's role?
This might sound bad, but stop chasing fair. Okay.
I
I
love
find
that.
I find that I wrote a blog on that recently, and I think that's what I titled it. But this notion of justice or fair or right and wrong, yes, you're absolutely right to feel slighted or frustrated or whatever feelings that client is feeling, but stop chasing fair within the legal or ADR processes, because you need to be focusing on what's good enough, what's fair enough, because there's no such thing as fair. You're not going to get 50-50 of every single thing you want. You're not going to achieve a result that you're thrilled with. Oftentimes in this process, both parties walk away feeling slighted, and that's just the nature of it. So when you stop chasing fair, you give up on this heightened conflict, and what you open yourself up to instead is the possibility of, okay, I can live with that. Okay, that's fair enough. And that goes back to Dory's question about the Watna and the Batna. What is your wants versus your needs? What is your best case scenario within this framework of fair enough?
No, I love that. And I often say to clients that, first of all, fairness is subjective. What
Yeah.
Heather thinks is fair, what Taya thinks is fair, what I think is fair, what Steve thinks is fair. They could all be completely different things. So it's subjective. And then, secondly, I always tell clients it's not a justice system, it's a legal system. And there's a difference.
I
And,
love that.
clients come in, I want justice, but law, sometimes it's just, but it
Member
isn't always.
directory.
And you can't be having that as your focus.
Yeah, great. So to wrap up, how to find a DCAO divorce coach.
We do have a couple of questions. Do you want to
Oh,
do those or just breeze through this and then we answer the
can we
questions?
just breeze through this quickly
Go
and
for it.
then we'll get to the questions? And then how to become a DCAO member. So how to join membership. So go onto our website, dcao.ca. Why become a member, how to join, choose the appropriate category, and you're good to go. And then just before we go, draw your attention to the next webinar in our series, which will be taking place on May 13th. And I'm sure, Taya, you will be inundating everybody's LinkedIn with gentle and happy reminders of this. Okay, so now let's get to the questions.
Sure. I'm just going back. Sorry.
Just be
From
mindful of
Adriana.
everyone's time. We only have about 4 minutes.
Yeah. So this one is, hey, Heather and Leanne, I'm a mortgage broker specializing in spousal buyouts and usually get brought in after the separation agreement. I can clarify affordability, how support can be used as income, and what equalization will look like from a financial perspective. From your perspective, would it be helpful to involve someone like me earlier to confirm what a client can actually qualify for, especially if they can't afford to stay near the matrimonial home? In the case of children in school proximity, etc.
I say yes, because having the client armed with that information could certainly help in their negotiation process and expedite and eliminate rather some of the conflict generated discussions that they may have if they have more realistic expectations about what they can and cannot afford and what their financial future is going to look like. They're much better equipped to negotiate from a good position.
And I echo Heather's comments on that.
Okay. The next two are more comments than questions, but maybe you'll have something to add to it. Kim says, so often clients feel that lawyers are not doing their job when in fact it's the client who is unaware of truly what they want from the lawyer.
Yep.
I think that's a great point. I always say as a lawyer, I always go back to the Teddy Roosevelt saying about the man in the arena. I don't know if Brene Brown quotes it a lot, and the man in the arena is the one getting kicked and scratched and dirt thrown on them. And I feel that's the lawyer. The lawyer is in that arena. They're in a process often they don't have control over. They can't control what a judge says. It's a broken system. It's not effective. It doesn't work. They've got a client who probably has unrealistic expectations that they're trying to manage. And they are the easy person for everyone to point the finger at that they're not doing a good job. They're doing this wrong or they're doing that wrong. They are the focal point for the wrath, especially if they're not managing the client properly. I mean, that's a very important part of a lawyer's job is managing their client and managing their expectations. Um, so I do think tying in with what Kim said, I think it is if a lawyer is doing their job properly, they are managing their client's expectations, and so the client is less likely to be dissatisfied with the lawyer is doing because they understand why certain things were done, or they understood going into that motion that they may not succeed, and these are the reasons why they may not succeed, and that may be the outcome. And so they're not as disappointed because they knew from the outset that could be a distinct possibility.
And let's not forget, everybody has a role to play in this, and the client is not excluded. It is the client's role, and it is incumbent upon them to show up to their lawyer meetings, again, to concisely and clearly convey their goals, their wants, their needs, and be a strategic partner. And a coach helps them do that effectively.
We have some questions here from Anamika.
So we're
Uh,
out of time. So
okay.
what is the protocol for this?
It's a really easy question. Are there
Yep.
specific positions in law firms for divorce coaches, or do they practice independently? So both can happen.
Both
Yeah,
can
both.
happen.
I think there's some law firms that have them in-house, and there's
Yep.
lots of divorce coaches who have their own practice.
Yeah. Yeah. Any other questions or have we?
That's
Okay.
all the questions.
So let me reiterate our gratitude for everybody showing up today. And we thank you so much for the engaging conversations and questions. Some of them were some tough doozies there. So thank you for making us think. And I hope everybody enjoyed this. And please, I hope that you will join it for our next one on May 13th.
Thank you, everybody.
All right. Ciao.
Thanks,
Enjoy the rest of
everyone.
your day.